Welcome everyone to BoomerWorks. My name is Shira Lotzar. Happy to be your host tonight, joined by Jen Dalton, who is going to be our speaker tonight. And she is back by popular demand and did another presentation for us. And she is an expert in personal branding and corporate branding. And she has some wonderful insights around how to choose your company names. So Jen, we are looking forward to hearing your pearls of wisdom. Take it away.
Thank you so much and welcome. I see a few other people have joined as well. Feel free to introduce yourself and chat, and also maybe share what are you hoping to get out of today's session. As the title suggests, we're going to go through a couple of ways to think about naming your business. But if you haven't figured out a name, let us know that in chat. If you have, let us know that in chat just so we have some context and can help you the most. There's also a worksheet. Sure, if we can drop that in chat, that would be great. If not, I can also upload it.
Yeah, actually, just to let you know, if I can, I'll just interject. I already loaded it onto our BoomerWorks website. So go to BoomerWorks.org, and I will put the link in the chat for everybody to reach it. It's going to be under the training center, and then it's going to be under the marketing your business tab, and all the way at the bottom we have downloads, and it's going to be the very last download there. Okay.
Fantastic. Yeah. You also can just have a sheet of paper and pen. So if you don't have the worksheet, that's okay. You can reference that later too. When I think about what goes into a name, and I think of naming your business a little bit like naming your kid. It's important. You have to think about it. You're going to have to live with it. And your business will have to live with it, and your clients will have to live with it. And so what I want to take us through today is how can we brainstorm really thoughtfully, intentionally about it, not only from a, is it relevant to your audience, but is it relevant to your business strategy? Is it relevant to your marketing? And so we'll go through that brainstorming. We'll also talk about how is it different? Why does that matter? And I'll highlight some examples as we go through. And lastly, tying it back to the big picture of what else to think about, because a name can sometimes be thought about in isolation, but it really matters to a lot of other decisions you're going to be making about your business. So if you do have questions, please feel free to raise your hand or drop them in chat. I am paying attention to both. I have way too many monitors, but I'm happy to stop and answer a question if it's timely based on where I'm at. Now, one of the things that I think is really important about a name and a brand is that it helps you choose to work with a business faster because you recognize what it is that the company might be doing. Hopefully a brand also gives you confidence, but a name should give you that too. It should give you insight, information, and then hopefully it connects. Now there are a lot of brands out there. I'm going to throw a couple of names up on the screen. Some you may know, some you may not, but I'm going to talk through why I think they're really powerful. Now this first one, and I don't know if any of you guys know this store. It is in Leesburg, Virginia, Northern Virginia. It actually is a case study in my first book, The Intentional Entrepreneur. And anybody want to tell me, what do you think this business does? Best rack around.
I think that's actually probably your point, is that you can't figure out what it does.
It'll make sense in a second. Best rack around.
Maybe it's ribs?
No. Man.
Business clothing. Secondhand clothing or something like that.
That's interesting. Thank you for that. So best rack around.
First thing I think is bike rack.
Oh, you guys are all wrong, but I love all of it. So I'm going to give you a hint. Look at the acronym.
Bra. I almost went there. A bra store.
Yes.
I thought that too, but I wasn't even going to try to mention that.
You're like, I'm not going to be the first one to bring that up. Yeah. So, best rack around. And yes, the acronym is BRA. So from that standpoint, clever. But just saying the words might not be quite enough, right? And so I'm going to circle back to logo and mark and tagline. But as we think about the name, as evidenced by this conversation, which is fantastic, there are a lot of ways people can read things and interpret them. So sometimes we as a business owner might think, wow, that is the best name ever. And yet when we go ask people, well, what business do you think we're in? We had a rib store, we had a bike rack, we had all kinds of ideas. but it is in fact a bra. It's a fantastic store. Patagonia. Hopefully everybody's heard of Patagonia, the store. Yes, I think so.
Yes.
Been around
Brand,
a long
yeah.
time. Yeah, it's one of my favorite brands. What comes to mind if you haven't heard of Patagonia? What comes to mind?
Outdoors. If you haven't heard of it,
Yeah, or if you have, I mean,
the region, the
Yeah.
geographic.
I would say, this is Erica. I would say South America.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, just mountains.
Yep, mountains, absolutely. And so for Patagonia, you know, it's all about clothing, all about outdoor, all about environment. In fact, Patagonia ran a huge campaign in the New York Times a few years ago that basically said, don't buy any more of our stuff. And they said, send in your old stuff and we'll fix it. And so their brand is all about responsibility to the environment. And so the name, if you know Patagonia and you know the environment outdoors, it could lead you down that path. It's been around for a very long time, so most people recognize it. But everything they do is about their brand. Google. That was not a name before Google ever came around. Anybody know what Google comes from?
I think it's like Googleplex, which is like a huge number.
Right?
Lots of zeros and ones, and yes. So Google originally came from this more complex idea, right? But as a company, we all know it as go to the search engine and search. You Google something, it's become synonymous with search. And so even though it was a weird name to begin with, everybody knows exactly what it is when we say it. Although it might have different emotions now than it did in the past. North Italia, I got to give a shout out. That's why I have 2 small businesses and 2 big businesses. North Italia, anybody have thoughts on what that might be?
Restaurant.
Yeah, a really good restaurant in Tyson's and Reston and probably elsewhere. Best pizza ever, but you know, doesn't have pizza in the name. But once you search and look up restaurants, you'll find it. Very, very popular. So I just share these examples because you do need more than just a name, which is what we'll talk through today. All right, so I want to go through some brainstorming, and then I'd love to have us take some time and brainstorm some of your names. Anybody have company names that they're toying with, or where are folks at in the naming journey before we jump in?
I had, yeah. And I'd be willing to share a little bit about that.
Okay. All right, perfect. And so you've chosen your name, or are you still deliberating?
I've chosen to just go with me. I'm a graphic designer, so I've gone with Judah Lynn Design. But I was Moon Disc for a really, really long time. And maybe we can talk about that if it happens to be worthy.
Absolutely. Anybody else want to share a name that they've been thinking about? Erica?
Yes, the Elf Enchanted Garden. My name is Erica Lewis Forsyth, and my initials are Elf, and I often use that.
That's so exciting. Okay. I'm biased. I go to the Renaissance Festival every year. I like Elf Enchanted Forest, but I will try not to let that sway our brainstorming. But thank you. I love that. Anybody else have a name they want to share for their business? Diana?
Actually, I do not have a new name, but I'm in that process of transition of wanting to rebrand what I have, because I don't think it is really working for me. So I haven't created another one at this time.
Okay. So maybe as we go through some of the brainstorming, if you want to share any of that, or we can brainstorm out loud, just let me know.
I had the weirdest thing going on. Can you see me? Am I showing up?
We can see the top 2/3 of your head.
I can't. Yeah. Okay, I'm not seeing me at all, and I just didn't know whether I was visible. All right, something's malfunctioning, but thank you for that.
Well, of course.
At least you can hear me.
I can hear you, and if you sit back, I can see you. So
there's an option under view, if you don't mind my suggesting, at the top of your view, where you can hide your self view. You may have got that selected by accident.
Hi.
A little
That
view
is
icon at the
true.
top.
Yeah,
You got
that's
standard gallery. There's a hide self view. You may have done that inadvertently.
Okay, I'll check it.
or we may just need to buy some more monitors. All right, so let's
Thank you.
yeah, of course. Here are some questions I'd love to throw out there. And if you see one that resonates with you, or maybe you haven't thought of, definitely raise your hand, chime in, and share that in chat. Because I think a lot of times when we go to name our company, we're either rushing because we have a great idea and we want to get it to market and let's pick a name and go. But we don't necessarily have the experience or the patience to think about some of these bigger questions. And so one of the things that I think is important to consider is whatever you name your company, are you going to be a solopreneur or are you building a team? And if you're building a team, would they want to work at a company that's a person's name, or would they want to work at a company that's more of a company type name? Now, obviously, if you're in design or fashion, people want to work at Louis Vuitton or Alexander McQueen or whatnot. And that name is the brand that was built on a person's design skills. But if you're building a team, or let's say in the future, 10 years from now, you want employees to buy into the company or take over and you sort of step back as chairperson, then you want to think about, again, what's that name? Because sometimes if we name a firm after a person, it can seem like a smaller company. If we name it more of a corporate name, you can play bigger right away. And again, it just depends on if you want to build a niche boutique, maybe a name is okay. But if you want to build something and grow and scale, then you may want to think about how do we make a name that's a bit bigger? Here's another question. Is your company something that you're keeping within the family? Do you want to have a family name? Or is it something that is a lifestyle business? Or even if it's not, if it's something that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you want to sell, then thinking about how might the name impact those decisions? How might it impact passing it down to a family member, or if you're going to exit and sell? Again, there's not a perfect answer, but I think these questions are important to think about because it may change how you approach it. Just like you might have people perceive your name or brand differently if they want to work with you, customers can perceive it differently too. So just like we were talking about best rack around, how is your audience perceiving the name of your business? You might think it's very clear what you do, but your audience might not, and specifically your target audience. Here's another one that I think is very interesting, and maybe I can use Erica's example. So if we have Elf Enchanted Forest, microgreens, let's say Erica wanted to expand into other services or products. Does that name allow her to continue to expand? It might. It depends on what those products or services are. So something to consider would be based on your company name, can you continue to grow your business or not? And again, it's just something to think about. This is huge. And a lot of times people are like, I don't have any competitors. And it's like, no, you always have competitors. They may be other choices people make because they don't know about your company. They may be direct competitors, or maybe people don't do anything because it's an empty market space and they don't even know to look for you. But it's important to look and see what are all of the names and do you stand out and are you different? And so I would encourage you to go out and try to find competitors and just see what are their colors, what are their logos, what is the name, what is the message, but see if you're unique or different, if that's a good thing, if you're not sure. But I think that's really something that's important to do. And obviously, does your name stand out? It doesn't have to be a Google, but it does need to be something that's easy to remember, easy to say, easy to share, and not something you forget. Hopefully, it describes what you do. but it may not. I mean, look at Google. It had to become that. So if your company name is not exactly what you do, let's say it's your actual name, then I'm going to give you some ideas for how to work around that if you don't have any other clues in the description to help people understand, well, what business are you in? So let me pause here. I think it's the last question on this slide. But let me pause. Did any of these questions make folks go, interesting, I might change my answer? Or does it help you think through and go, yep, I've got the exact right name. I've thought through all these questions. Where are folks at as you look at some of these?
So I wanted to give a little case study of my own.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So I've been in business now as a solopreneur for over 10 years, right? And I went through a whole process of picking out my names. The name of my company is Purposeful Hire. Okay. So at the time, people knew because I had actually come from an agency where I did this work that I'm doing now, but I did it for somebody else. So I launched on my own. So I already had a brand, a personal brand. Okay. When I had to pick the company name, so I said, all right, well, what do I do? Well, the main thing that people knew me for was recruiting, right? And I'm still going to do recruiting. I also was starting to launch a career coaching service. Well, recruiting, career coaching, right? It's in that hiring world. And Purposeful Hire is HIRE. And so it kind of made sense, right? And as the business grew, I kept adding lanes to my highway. So I would build this brand, and then people would say, oh, Shira, can you help me with? And if it made sense, right? I said, yes. So, hey, can you do some executive coaching? Yep, sure can. Last year, hey, can you do some strategic planning for our nonprofit? Yep, can do that too. Now, those two things aren't exactly hiring, but it ended up becoming part of what I call, at least the executive coaching is part of workforce. And the strategic planning was part of the community that I served, which was nonprofits, right? And so people didn't really care that it was Purposeful Hire. It was like, then they kind of knew me as this person that kind of did this full service work. Now, I'm not going to go off and sell microgreens, right? Right? That's very off. That's not my brand. But if it has to do with either the services that I provide in the workforce, or it has to do with sort of the nonprofit association world that I serve, it kind of all falls together. But in the beginning, it made sense because it really latched onto the larger thing that I was doing around hiring.
I love that example, right? And I think it conveys what you do, and it's also a differentiated name when you look at purposeful, because I know that has a lot of.
It's my why. My why is baked into my name. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
All right, I think, and I may not say your name right, but Judah, were you going to share an example? And please correct me if I did not say your name correctly.
Yes, my name is Judah.
Yay.
And you said it correctly. Thank you, Jen. Well, yeah, I mean, a lot. So I'm a designer branding person. So I'm just, the gears are going here. I guess it's your fourth point here, is easy to expand services or products. What came to my mind was Apple, who actually went the different direction. If everybody knows here, used to be Apple Computer for years and years and years. And they realized, oh, wait, we sell phones and iPads. So they rebranded themselves as Apple Incorporated. So it's interesting the way that goes both ways. I also had a client once. He was a printer, and I think it was Omega Printing was his business, and there was another Omega printer. So the first thing that comes up to me nowadays is you have to search, just go ahead and search. Somebody might have your name, and then of course, if you do a search,
Hold on 1 second. We just need to. There we go.
All yes, right, then you've got yeah. Anyway, those are just the things that came up for me. This is great breakdown, Jen.
Well, and I appreciate that, and I think oftentimes people in the first year, we do figure out pricing and we figure out messaging. But as much as you can do focus groups and research and brainstorming in advance about the name, it's really important because you don't want to keep changing your name. Rebranding can be a challenging exercise and it takes a lot of energy. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. There will be times where you should, but you want to be very intentional about that. Now, one of the things that I have clients who come to me, they're like, what's the difference between branding and marketing and sales? I'm not going to talk about sales tonight, but I will talk about branding and marketing. And so for me, this is my framework. So that doesn't mean everybody in the world agrees with me, but this is how I think of it. There are things when we talk about brand that are very obvious to people, like a name, a logo, colors, tagline, images. But those things also inform marketing, your marketing pieces, your collateral, your website. But when we think about marketing, it's you're putting out a marketing campaign that generates an action. So when I see an ad on TV for Wendy's French fries, I want to go get Wendy's French fries. But the reason I want to do that is because of the brand. So I've either had their food before, I love their, the ambiance, the feel, the taste of the food, whatever. But brand is all about how are we making our audience feel? How are we connecting with them? What is it that we're consistently doing over time to create an emotional connection? So I share this because on the one hand, your name, like Purposeful Hire, has an emotional connection, and it also has a reason from a marketing standpoint that it's a great name because people know what they're going to get right when they see the name. It's right in front of them. And so it's very important to think about how's the name making people feel? What is it helping them think about doing next? So what does it help people know? What does it help people feel? And then what do they go do? Those are sort of the three actions I always look for. Questions here. Does this make sense? I saw Judah nodding your head, so thank you for that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that what I'm getting out of this so far is, is what you and Shira are talking about is the why behind it. So for example, I am launching an advocacy money management business, and I see where others, competitors will name it just to say XY Financial Services. In my mind, I'm thinking that's too dry, and that's too dry for my personality as well. So I like what you say, that it's what you want to be known for.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. I think it's important to love the name of your business.
Right.
You're going to be wearing it, talking about it, using it at everything. And so if you don't love it, I would say keep brainstorming.
Right.
And so, and it should feel authentic, right? It's a reflection of you. And so as I share thoughts today, some of this is more just so we're all using the same language before we jump into brainstorming. But one of the things that I think is important is to think about the big picture, because we don't just have your company name to work with. We also have, in addition to the name, and you could think of like Coca-Cola, their logo is their name, and it's very specific font. Google, it's the visual in front of you. And it's also colorful and blah, 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 but it's the word. When we look at something like a Nike, right, they have a swoosh, they have a mark. When we look at Shell gas, they have an actual shell, right, to reinforce the name. And when you look at the tagline, can anybody think of a company tagline? You pick one. You tell me. Coca-Cola. Tagline?
Good hands, people. That's what comes to mind. Allstate.
Allstate.
Good hands.
Yeah, totally. Nike's tagline?
I don't know. Apple, think different.
Just do it.
Just do it. Yep.
Just do it. Yeah.
And Apple's interesting because it was a little bit in retaliation to IBM that said, think IBM. And then Apple said, think different. And it was around a whole ad campaign on people who are, very different thinkers, Picasso, etc. So, when you think about your company name, let's say you come up with something and maybe it's really great, like Purposeful Hire. I actually don't need anything else. I know exactly what Shira's company does. But let's say you come up with a name and you're like, well, but I wanted to include this word, or I wanted to convey something else. You can actually use your tagline, your mark, the name sort of triangulate and give people clarity. You can give them some more clues. And so if we think about Dunkin' Donuts, everyone runs on Dunkin', right? All of those images and things together can really convey the value of something and give people more information. Let me pause here. Does that make sense? And so, you may go to, and I don't want to say don't recommend it, because sometimes different things help you think differently about how you're approaching a problem. Some of you may go to 99 Designs, or you may go to some logo generator, whatever. Those aren't always bad if it's to help just give you some things to react to. I will say graphic designers are worth their weight in gold, and I would pay a designer every day of the week to develop my logo. You may need to have a starting place to give you some thoughts. Maybe you don't have the budget quite yet. You can, for my 5th year anniversary, I actually redesigned my logo, same name, just new logo. And when I first started, and also, when I redesigned for my 5th anniversary, I paid a graphic designer to do it. So I think it's really important, if you're working with someone and you have the budget, to really try to get a good logo. It's not required, but I highly recommend it. Questions on the name, the mark, and the tagline? Thoughts here? And so the logo is all of these together. I'm going to come back to why this matters in a couple of slides. All right. Everyone's like, oh gosh, now I got 3 things to juggle, Jen. You're making me think about more than just the name. I share this just because it's the big picture. You have a lot to work with, not just the name, but we do want to try to get that right. So I'm going to share 2 different examples, and thank you, Shira, for sharing yours. This is from my company, right? And so my full logo as brand mirror, reflect, stand out is my tagline. This is a mirror with a slice coming out to make a B. In case you didn't get that, just pretend that you did. But it was this idea of reflect, because I want people to be self-aware and think about who they are and think about what their business is, think about their why before they define their brand. And the reflect, stand out, that's the tagline, right? And this is my mark. So again, these all can add together to make your logo, but you want to think about, well, what else could I put in here? You could put in your company name. You could put in, let's take Erica's, right? So Elf Enchanted Forest. You could have a more microgreen visual as the mark. You could have that as the company name, Elf Enchanted Forest. But the tagline might be microgreens at your fingertips, whatever. Like, you could give some other piece of information to help people know what it is. And Erica, do you have a tagline? And you're on mute, so I can't hear you. You do have a tagline. I can read lips, but you're on mute. I can't read lips that well. There we go.
It is the Elf Enchanted Garden, and
so
the logo has it reflects the garden aspect, and the tagline for the microgreens is mini but mighty.
Ooh. And so as you think about a tagline, and I'm going to give you an exercise for taglines too, 4 words or less. If they are more than that, start over. We just don't have the attention span or capacity to do more. Now, what you're seeing on this slide is just a brand identity page, so 1-pager. So I can give it to my graphic designer and say, here are my colors, here's all this stuff, go make me some awesome graphics. Here's another example, Miss Jo's Petite Sweets. Her tagline is longer than 4 words. People can do it. I don't advocate for it. Life is sweet, have a treat. I like sweets, I'll get over it. Her sweets are very good. You can see all of her branding kind of goes together, but she has her mark is all together. Like you can't separate these out. It is her logo. It is the name. It is the tagline. You may not want to do that. You may want to have yours be a little bit more separate so you can do different things with it. Like the Nike swoosh, you can see the swoosh by itself and you know exactly what brand it is. Now, none of us are Nike, doesn't mean we can't be. Typically, you would want to have your name and your mark and your tagline, but not for everything. For a hat, for a coffee mug, for a t-shirt, maybe not. So you want to think about those things, you know, just as you're generating your name. All right, so one of the things I did, full disclosure, I had 3 of my girlfriends over one night. They all do branding and marketing. And I said, okay, I need to come up with a company name. We have a couple bottles of wine. Let's do this. And we just started brainstorming and writing down on big Post-it notes on my kitchen table all of the words that mattered to me that I wanted to be there to inform a name. And so I don't know how many of you have done this or not done this, but if you're thinking about coming up with a name, one of the things I would recommend is gather the words that you would use to describe your company. Right. And so for me, it was personal brand and reflection and a mirror and intentional and reputation and authentic, self-awareness, differentiate, discover. It was all of these different words, promises, brand promise. And so as we were looking at them, that's honestly when we came up with brand mirror. And so what I would encourage you to do, if you make a word cloud, go get 10 or 20 words from yourself, from focus groups, put them all in a word cloud and see which words are popping the most, right? A word cloud will make bigger the words that people use the most. And so again, it's just a tool, but it's something to think about. But what I think is important is, just like Shira, when she was talking about purposeful hire, is including words like purpose, purposeful, hire, recruiting, right? All of these words. And you can sort of get feedback from folks to go, well, what other words might people think about that maybe you're not thinking about? That's why it's important to include some words from friends, clients, family, because you might miss some words that could make some great names. Let me pause here. Anybody ever used a word cloud?
Yes.
It's a fun tool. It's not intimidating. It can be easy and helpful to brainstorm. And visually, it's fun. It's also fun as a way to communicate your brand, right? And so there are a lot of different ways to use some of these tools. All right, for those of you who don't like bottles of wine or brainstorming on Post-it notes in this format, here's another way to think about names. And I've done this before. I know this is, Shira and I have talked about this. It's also referenced in the book Pop by Sam Horn. But one thing you can do is, instead of doing a word cloud, if you're a bit more structured and want some like linear process steps, you can list out all the words in 2 columns and then mix and match. And you can start to pair words together. Now, one thing I do recommend, and you can see I added some words that I didn't have on the prior page. And I know you're like, really, a thesaurus? Yes, a thesaurus. Go look at a thesaurus. I typed in a reputation and look at all these fun words that came up that maybe I hadn't thought about. And you're going to find when you go to try to get a .com or a .net or .whatever, a lot of them are taken. And so you'll want to be brainstorming a lot of names. Now, sometimes your .com doesn't have to be your company name. It could be an action phrase that you use, but it does have to be easy to remember. So I want to make sure if you have a name, but you can't get the domain, don't freak out. There's other ways to solve that problem. But as far as a name generator, and think about, well, what other words could you use? Again, that you're not thinking of. And then just mix and match. So you can see here, brand stand, brand promise, brand clarity, standout brand, brand mirror. There's lots of other ones. Influential brand, right? Brand promise, which I already have here. So this could just be a way to mix and match. Sometimes they sometimes we can't come up with a Google kind of name, but we can create a new phrase or a new word, if you will. Thoughts on this approach? Which do you guys think you like better, the name generator or the word cloud? I'm just curious. Anybody have a preference, or have already tried one or the other?
Well, I use the name generator for purposeful hire because I read because it was from the pop book,
Yes,
right?
Yeah.
But it just made total sense to put the words together.
And I haven't heard of name generator, but I've used word cloud a little bit, and that sounds good too.
And it's just a couple of different ways you can try something and just see if you get something you hadn't thought about before. I definitely wouldn't brainstorm by yourself. It's important to have other people chime in. Sometimes we're too close to it and we get stuck and then we get frustrated. Questions or thoughts? Anybody have feedback on this approach?
This reminds me.
Yeah, go ahead.
The first time I saw something like this was how to make a name for a rock and roll band or for a band. Do you remember that? It's like Strawberry Alarm Clock was one that probably went through that process. And that was the first time I'd seen that sort of pairing, and that was some time ago. But maybe you remember that.
Yes. Yeah, you could totally play around with this. What would be your band name, or what would you name a band? And you can throw some crazy combinations up here.
Now, I don't know if you're going to go much more into the idea of making up your own word, but a lot of these depend on your space.
Yes.
And for me as a web designer, as a graphic person, they come up with all kinds of names. In fact, in web development, all these different libraries and all these, they're just so creative. And when people are talking about what it is they do and what they use, it just sounds like they're throwing candy around. It's just all these words are so fun, but they're all just making them up, and it's interesting. And that was kind of why I went with Moondisk, my company. What I was playing with is because it in that space, it just seemed to make sense. And also I searched, nothing came up for Moondisk when you search online, so I would pretty much own the search on that. But anyway,
I think that's a great point, right? I mean, Ellen's example of doing work in the advocacy and sort of I think finance space, is that right, Ellen? Did I get that right? Your name, probably don't want it to be too creative because it also needs to engender trust, but at the same time you want it to be differentiated, right? And so for a lot of the digital marketing companies, web tech companies, cyber, they can have a little fun with it because they're supposed to be forward-thinking, techie out there.
Right.
But if you need a name
I pride myself on my softer skills as well. So I guess I'd want to put that in there. And does anybody, I have in mind, as I'm like redoing myself, basically redoing my career, I have in mind like 2 different businesses that would probably be unrelated to each other. And so does anybody have any ideas that, for example, would you use 2 different company names or say possibly an LLC that might encompass both?
There's so much fun in that question. I'll give you my initial thoughts, and Shira, of course, jump in.
Right.
Well, first, my question would be, what are the 2 businesses and how different are they?
Okay. So one is the advocacy, financial advocacy. The other one is a travel agent. And in my mind, I'm thinking in terms of similarities, or that, that both I'd be doing like guidance, personal guidance, but in different manners.
And what was the second one again? You say travel?
Yes, travel.
Okay. My hypothesis, there are a couple of different ways you could do it. One, you could step back and have it be you as the guide, and you could have different products or services that you provide, whether it's financial advocacy, travel, etc. So you can do an umbrella brand that has these pages. They're not totally intuitive. You would need your audience to stretch a little bit.
Right.
That might be okay. But it depends. You'd have to really work on the messaging to make those play well together.
Right.
You could have one that is, as in, if you are the advocate helping others with their finances, it could be your personal brand. And then the travel business could have its own name.
That's kind of, because right now, just off the top of my head, and I'd love to hear anybody else's thoughts on this. Right now, just as we're talking, a name popped into my head for the advocacy, just as EBL Advocacy Services, but I'm going to do some more like word cloud or something for that to get more creative. And for the travel, I had already thought of a name as Beautiful Journey or Everyday Journey, something like that.
Why don't we take a second and Ellen, if you have a piece of paper in front of you and brainstorm some names, and then, for everybody else, if you want to brainstorm names or think about, are there any alternatives you might have missed? Let's take a second and look at what other words you might use. And I think, Judah, you're using your name, right? In design.
I am now, for the time.
You are now. And because you have the word design in there.
Ellen, something just occurred to me. While the two businesses are not linked per se, there might be a theme actually between them, and the theme might be freedom.
Oh, I love it.
Financial freedom, travel.
Thank you.
All I keep thinking, Ellen, is don't go on the lamb. So I'm not being useful right now for you.
That's okay.
But that
is you are.
Freedom. So yeah, I think step back and think about what are those common things. If it is guide, if it's freedom. When we think about our audience, we want to think about how are they going to feel when they get through working with you at the end of it. Right. And so that's where the purposeful hire is powerful, because it's not only the why, but it's someone will feel like they have a purposeful hire, like someone that's aligned with the why, with the organization, et cetera, et cetera.
I've actually had people say that to me.
I'm sure.
Once in a while, they actually, I'm a purposeful hire. Or this was a purposeful hire. Like, wow.
Absolutely, right. It's got to go together.
Right.
So if you want to take a second and brainstorm those, that'd be great. Judah, go ahead.
First, I love Shira's the idea of freedom, and but I'm also still kind of stuck with these companies are so different in a way, and it's kind of like mixing cuisines, and some things just don't, the financial advocacy is kind of serious, and then you've got the this idea of beautiful journey. It's very free flowing and fun and whimsical. And so even though you have a certain character that probably you can, that they be, like this idea of freedom, those businesses are so different. I couldn't see doing them, except it's like, then Uber Eats, and you can get Mexican and you can get, Thai, but that's a totally different service. And so that's just my thinking on this. So it really seems that there really is two different businesses here.
Well, and you have companies like Procter and Gamble, which most people don't know that name. I mean, if you're in brand and marketing business, you would. But most people would just think of Tide or Kleenex or a Procter and Gamble product. They don't know about the parent company name necessarily. And so the thing I want to circle back to is you mentioned LLC. I think every business should have some type of LLC or corporate entity just from a risk management standpoint. And you might operate as a beautiful journey. That might be your DBA or you're doing business as. But whatever you decide to come up with, I think they all need to have some type of entity. And I'm not a business attorney. I just know that to be true, so you mitigate personal risk.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely. The other thing I would throw out there is when you do these exercises, set a timer. It could be a minute where you jot down all the words you can think of. It can be 5 minutes. But if you're sitting there for 4 hours and you still don't have a name, that's too long, right? Give yourself a little bit of time to brainstorm and then step away from it if you need to. Okay, I wanted to go at this a little bit differently. And Ellen, this may give you, and everybody on the call, hopefully, give you a sense of types of names and other ways to think about naming. And so, you know, like Judah was mentioning, or if you're a fan of ice cream, you could have a company named after the owner, right? That can be very common, or after people. You could have a name, I should have added purposeful hire, that's descriptive or literal, like E-Trade, Toys R Us. It literally tells people what you do. Made up name, Xerox, if anybody remembers TiVo, Google. If names are created and you make something, it is much easier to protect legally, to trademark and copyright your content also. Then you've got companies like we've mentioned already, Nike, Patagonia. They're about imagery or analogy or metaphor. And so you can also pick a word like that. Acronym, we talked about BRA earlier, best rec around, IBM. Acronyms can be kind of not fun, not very creative, but it might work for your business. It just depends. And then we've got, you know, unique spelling like Netflix, or a combination, Citibank, for example. So if we take a second here, and I don't know, you know, if Tom wants to chime in or others, but this could be another way to brainstorm and see if you can come up with names in each of these buckets. What would they be? Because it might just be a good forcing function to step out of brainstorming in columns or word clouds or whatnot and go, well, what would I call this if I were going to use an acronym, or if I were going to use an image or an analogy or metaphor? What's my favorite thing? If anybody's a fan of Toblerone, they used to have the bear in their image and things like that in the mountains. They don't anymore. That's a different conversation. But you can think of, what do you love that would convey into the name and the brand of the company? Purposeful hire is a very intentional choice. It also happens to be what Shira does. But for your own business, you might have a favorite color, favorite image, favorite something, favorite story you tell that you want to incorporate into the name of the business. Thoughts here on this? And I don't know, Ellen may have stepped away, but
Michael Butera on our call actually did the unique spelling combination. So his company's called Association Activision, right? The Activision, I think, was interesting. Michael, remind me how you came up with the name.
Well, you were actually part of it. You know, what I did is I think it was a total of 5 different people that I went to, and we just played around with it, and we had a whole bunch of them. I can't remember. I've actually forgotten all of them now. We had a ton of different, you know, I work with associations, so I wanted that word in there. And I wanted to deal with future, and that's where vision came in. So in the logo piece, we spell Activision, capital A-C-T-I, capital V-I-S-I-O-N. So you get Association Activision. So a lot of people tell me what they see as Activision. I'm trying to remember everybody I went to, but it's kind of gone. You know, after 8 years, you kind of forget where it all started from. But Cher was a part of it, and thank heavens is what I have to say. So
Don't do it alone. I agree.
it's worked very well for me. In all candor, people pretty much know what I do, and although I do have a speaking business on the side, which I just use my own name for.
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier, and I think, going back to Alan's question, the financial advocacy, that might be something that is her brand, her name, and she's known as a financial, right, as someone who helps people from a financial literacy advocacy standpoint, whereas the travel company might have its own name.
I see.
That's just something to think about as to which one, because the downside of companies that are so different or products that are so different is you have two things to manage.
Right.
And I know, Michael, you definitely experienced that. If you've got a speaking site and then you've got your association company site.
Right.
But that might be the best choice, right? Because you might want to keep them separately from a tax standpoint, from money, bank account, whatever. Mm-hmm. So it just depends on what you're doing.
I see.
I wish there was a nice, easy.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. No, but this is all good food for thought.
And, I think you could go back and play around with the idea of freedom and journey and guide. What I would think about is, and I think, Judy, you might have brought this up as well, are the audiences you're targeting overlapping? So if you're targeting the same audiences, let's say,
and it can stuff, for example, because something that I had worked with a little bit, is medical travel, for example. So I kind of like the word that you threw out as far as guide and journey.
You
could have some fun with that.
You could, and it could also be, you have a company that is financial guide and you have a company that's not travel guide, but something else, right? But they have a similar word that at least on one business card, you could put both or something. But I would brainstorm all of those scenarios first, and you can do pros and cons. Is it confusing or not? Do they really overlap? Do they have the same end audience? Are you using the same process for both? Like, just because we'd love for something to fit in under one company doesn't mean it should.
I see. Right. So
it's okay to be honest with ourselves and say, yeah, this isn't going to work. And it would just a little bit more work.
Okay. Right. If it would be too confusing to the point where people really don't know what you do.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
Michael, what were you going to say?
I was just going to, this is probably a terrible idea, but I would
throw it out there.
That's a great lead-in, Michael. I love it. Yeah.
I was trying, when she was talking about liberty and freedom and all that kind of stuff, there's a Roman god of freedom. His name is Libertas. And if you had the right tagline to go with something like that, actually, Nike is from a Greek god. At least they say in their promotional material, that's where they got it. I don't know if that's true or not. I have no idea at all. But sometimes, if you could think historically, you could find something like that. And then if you have the right tagline to go with it, like you said, just a few words, that might work. So I'm not recommending it. I was just trying to brainstorm in my own head.
Yeah, thank you.
How you might come up with something.
No, I love it. And like, if you were to fill out this table, you could put Libertas in, right, the mythological names category. You could do something fun with the unique spelling.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think playing around and brainstorming without constraining, but while having structure is helpful. And so hopefully in a couple of these different exercises, something will come out for a user
Okay.
looking.
Right.
So we've got these types of names. And again, I would try to fill out the whole table, right? Brainstorm, see what all you can come up with. When you're brainstorming names, there's no bad name yet. We're trying to get a lot of different examples on the table. And then, of course, you go get feedback on them.
Yeah, Jen, I absolutely love that table. I just love coming at it from all these different perspectives. That makes it really rich and really helps you break out of the box. You know, and so super job.
So, would you change anything, or you're sticking with the name design, Judalyn design?
Oh, for now, I'd have to go through the whole process. Yeah.
And so there are times where using your personal name makes perfect sense.
Well, as I'm now just kind of embracing the being a freelance, you know, being independent,
Yeah.
it works for me right now because
Absolutely.
And also I've been pivoting a lot these days. It was Judalyn graphic design, so I just let's make a design because I was doing like 3D or motion design and too many things. And I think just one more thing. I don't know if we're going to have a chance to circle back with Ellen, so I'll bring it up now. Is the idea of doing too many things can sort of make you think maybe you're not so good at either of them, or how good can you be at either of them?
Yeah.
Like for me, as an example, I do 3D visualization, plus maybe, like I said, graphic design or presentation design. And those are like, or if I'm doing development, back in JavaScript development, like, maybe I can do that, but someone who's looking for a graphic designer says, well, this guy seems a little bit, maybe he's split. Right? How good can he really be at either of these things? Because they're so vastly different. And I think that's the idea. I don't know if you remember Van Halen and their frontman, David Lee Roth. I think he went out on his own and did these videos and he called themselves the Picasso Brothers. I don't know if you remember that. And he talked about why he named it the Picasso Brothers. And it was because they were so completely different. In his mind, Picasso was very refined and an artist, and then Brothers was just sort of like, these guys who just kind of did stuff, And so he like intentionally mixed these things to kind of be a little disruptive or be kind of unique. So anyway, there's all ways of approaching it, but that's just my concern with the businesses is how good could you be at either of these, and especially when it comes to something like financial advocacy, where you're really taking care of somebody. I'd want to feel like I'm in really good hands, but that's what you really do. You're the expert.
Well, I think of that like when I work with CEOs, or if I think of it, my new version of it is the Elon Musk syndrome. You're running Tesla, you're running a space company, and you're running Twitter. Are you doing all of them really well? And it could be the answer is yes, and I'm working 120 bazillion hours a week. But to your point, are you focused on all of them really? And so I think, when we launch a business, being niche and very specific to be terrific makes a huge difference. And so I think that gut check of when you're introducing yourself to someone and you're like, oh, I do financial advocacy and I have a travel business. And they'll be like, wait a minute, I don't understand. Then, you play that out while you're out networking and you're like, yeah, maybe this doesn't quite fit. Or you just realize, okay, well, I've got two totally different businesses and I'm up to manage them. But now you're also dividing your focus and you're trying to grow two businesses. So it's just something to think about. How much time do you have? How much energy? Which business? If you were to have two, like in Ellen's case, let's pretend there were two. Where do you have the most opportunity to generate revenue and the most client base? And Shira talked about with Purposeful Hire, that was already built on a personal brand of hiring and recruiting. So that's a good runway already. If you've never done financial advocacy or never done travel work, probably don't want to start with that one. You want to pick where you're the strongest. You've got the best personal brand. So when you go to build this company brand, you've got more runway and you've got more momentum. Just my 2 cents.
If I may, going back to the question that Sheriff gave me, the second choice was a name called Association Solutions, which was well liked by a lot of people, to be candid with you. I chose differently. That's obvious. But the other thing I did is I own every conceivable
version of that.
version of association solution as well as association activation. And I've actually been offered money for them, but
Sure.
I'm not selling. So, somehow you got to protect the name once you decide on it. That might be a little bit off base with what you were doing here today, but
no, I think the reality that we're in is that people might want to find your website through your name or through a version similar to your company name or through a phrase you use, and you want to own all of those. Right, Judah, if you decide you want to have you want to go back to Moondisk, or now you want to have Sundial, whatever, then you should still own your own name as a domain, because someone might want to find you through that, or you might want to build your own personal brand website later. And I mean, I even tell people, like, if your kids don't have their domain yet, you should buy the domain of your kids' names just so it's protected. But I agree with you, Michael. Like, if you have a couple of different names you might have chosen or that someone might use instead, you want to redirect them from a domain standpoint. So yes, there's the naming of what goes on your business card, and then the domain name is a whole nother strategy. But I love everything you're sharing, and I'm glad you're sharing it.
Yeah, just one further example. My last name is a very common Italian name, Butera. In fact, the largest cigar maker in the world is Butera Cigars. And, they're quite expensive and very, very good. And so, that was one of the problems with using Butera. It didn't work.
Yeah.
And I can't compete with their work. They're branded all over the world, for heaven's sakes. That's it. And I don't smoke cigars anyway, so.
Well, and so you are giving me a very nice segue into this slide. I appreciate you, Michael. When we think about, we've chosen a name, and I did want to share a tool. There is a website called noam.com. I don't know if anybody's familiar with this. You can go and put in a name, and it will tell you if the domain's available, if the name is available, and if the social media handles are available, all in one place. So you can go look up, financial advocacy is not going to be available, but let's pretend it was. You could go look it up and say, oh, is it available or not? Or across which channels? And you can play with other versions too, but it's a nice one-stop shop. What I would say is, Michael, let's take your example of association solutions. Is it meaningful? Kind of. Like, in theory, you're doing something where you're giving association solutions. I hope so. Like, otherwise the name would be association problems. Like, no, we don't want to do that. Right. But it may not be meaningful enough to protect it. And so as we're thinking of company names that we want to be able to trademark and protect, we do want to think about, is it meaningful? Is it distinctive? Purposeful hire is distinctive. Doodle and design, the way the spelling is distinctive, right? There's probably not many of you. There are a lot of Jen Daltons, New Jersey housewives, I think. Anyways, is it future oriented? If that's important, something to think about. Modular. So going back to Ellen's question, is the business name something where you can add additional services and products? You could think of, what's a good example? Let's go back to Apple. They took off the word computers, right? They just have Apple, but they could then have iPhone, iPad, all these sub products. So it's a bit modular. They've got the I now in front of it all. And the Apple has become more synonymous with knowledge, right? And great design, of course. Is it protectable? So just like we were talking about, is it positive? Is it visual? I added these because they're things that clients always struggle with. Does your name and logo or mark work in black or white and color? Does it work in multiple mediums? Could you put it on a t-shirt? Could you put it in a Facebook circle? Could you put it on LinkedIn in a square? Could you put it on a business card? Could you put like all of these questions? Some people have logos that fade in their color, which is like, I think the worst ever, because that's very hard to get that on a pen or a shirt or whatever. If it works in black and white, that's different. But so just think about how complex are you making things? It should be 1, 2, or 3 colors, probably not more, that kind of a thing. But those things all play into this entire conversation about what is your name, logo, and visual evoking so people know what you do. And to your point, right, you brought up websites. So is the domain available? Social media available? And then if you go research trademark, you might come up with a great name. And then you go look in the trademark database at uspto.gov and it's already taken. Sorry. Hello, Ellen's dog. And so you want to make sure before you get wed to an idea that you're double checking it and making sure it's not already in use. I would Google it. I would look in the pto.gov, like all of that. That I find is also hard when you come up with a really great name and you're like, ah, it's taken. And so it's important to try to be objective and step back a little bit. Otherwise, it can be kind of challenging when you're brainstorming a name. And so once you go through this process, you might just tweak some of your ideas. Maybe you give something, go back and look at your idea list and you just tweak it a little bit, change it a little bit. But you do want to make sure it kind of meets these criteria. Google obviously would check all of these boxes. TikTok would check all of these boxes. These are new and different and sort of made up phrases. Although TikTok, I mean, there's meaning behind both of these, but they were not words we used before. They've been added to our lexicon. Questions on this? Does this make sense as you're looking at these buckets? Anything that's not clear as you sort of assess it from a name standpoint?
This is great, Jen. The other thing that this brings up, especially the final box here. Well, first of all, a friend of mine had a window tinting company, and he called it Arctic window tinting, and he told me because A comes first in the phone book, and I don't know how relevant that is now. I mean, actually, it is. I mean, if actually A will come higher in some searches. But at any rate, the other thing is the value of a graphic designer in terms of multiple mediums. You can't. It's very rare that one logo will service all your needs, and so you need, one piece of artwork, because you'll need one at larger sizes, smaller sizes, want to put over, make it black and white, and one without the logo mark and all that sort of stuff. And people don't think about that so much. Legibility is like one of the your foundations in graphic design. I have like the second example of branding you used today. That woman's colorful cake was completely, if I don't maybe say it, completely illegible, almost completely illegible. And I have a friend who's, I've been sort of biting my tongue because she's an artist, and artists will come up with one thing, but it's not a graph, it's very, it has to serve a purpose. And I think there's a lot more nuance in that than people might realize. So, just
there is a practicality that has to be balanced with creativity. But yes, this is all personal. When we go to come up with our business, it's about you've decided to invest you into this next venture. And so as you're coming up with names and logos and colors and all of that, and you want to step back and think about what actually works, right? When I could do a whole talk on colors and logos, right? Red and blue are the most used colors. Why? Right? There's lots of reasons behind that. It doesn't mean you have to choose it, but you do want to know, will this help me or will it make it harder? If I choose a name that's hard to say, but it means a lot, that's just a trade-off that, you as the business owner, you get to make because you're the owner, but there could be a consequence. As long as you're okay with that consequence, no problem.
And nowadays it has to fit in a square. Every time I see the Verizon logo, I always cringe because it's just so, of course they've sort of made it work, but it needs to fit, it needs to be legible in a square or some version of it.
And if you have a long name, it doesn't really work on LinkedIn. You have to squint to see it if you're lucky, right? So you have to make sure it works stacked, which is why a tagline can be helpful and a mark, because you can kind of rearrange the name and the elements. But same with Coca-Cola, right? So, it's just something to think about. Now, they have a huge brand, so they're obviously a little bit different position. So here are some examples I wanted to share where you start to see, we talked about these taglines in the beginning. These can also apply to names, but I think that the taglines is important. You can think of taglines as evidence or a call to action. They're not a slogan, although slogan in Welsh means war cry. So I kind of like this idea. If you were your business running down the street, what would you be yelling at people, trying to rally them around, like a purpose, a why? For Nike, their tagline is not shoes, clothes, and stuff. It's just do it, right? It's an emotional message. It's not, it doesn't tell you what they do. In fact, none of their names do what they do. It's all about the feeling and the emotion. Same with Apple. We know they sell computers and iPads, but that's not here. Now they've built a brand where they have permission to do that because we know them. You can have a descriptive tagline. I tend to like this structure. It's 4 words, 2 and 2, but target, right? Expect more, pay less. It tells you what they do to some degree. These 2 are the most popular tagline types ever. And it's not surprising. It's a call to action, or it's descriptive in case your name doesn't say enough. There are others for people who like BMW, right? The ultimate driving machine, De Beers, a diamond is forever. They're positioning that company as best in class. Got milk? I think everybody probably remembers that question. That's a provocative tagline, right? I don't know if anybody knows it's from the Dairy Council. Well, we all know the tagline. So that's a different issue. Then you've got very specific taglines that tell you the category. And so, Ellen, if you came up with an advocacy name, but you needed to put the finance in the tagline, or if you came up with a financial name, but you put advocacy in the tagline, you can move the words around that you've played with and brainstormed to help fill in the story of what does your company do. And Michael, I don't know, does your company have a tagline?
Yeah, your association accelerator.
And so it gives people even more information around what kind of solutions you might offer. And so as you think about playing with the tagline, the name, the logo, the mark, it's important just to think about these different ways you might do that. Ellen, is this helpful to see sort of taglines, or Diana or Tom?
Absolutely. This is gaining a lot out of this presentation. It's excellent. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And it is puzzle pieces. So
one thing that I keep thinking about is the byline that Washington Post started using, democracy dies in darkness.
Mm-hmm.
And, and I love that, because to me, it brings something to the heart and, and to the mind about keeping the First Amendment alive. And
it's very provocative, right?
Yes.
And it is all about this feeling that it evokes. Mm-hmm. And so the Target tagline, it's not a sexy tagline, but it does tell you what to expect, right?
Right.
Democracy dies in darkness.
And it tells you the why.
It tells you, yes. But Democracy Dies in Darkness is a whole story. Like I envision a movie and, all kinds of things come out with that. And so that's where you can really have some fun, is the tagline. You can have fun with the name too, but you have these other elements that can tell your story in a very short space or a very short time frame where you can. And so just something to think about. You have a lot of real estate to play with to help make sure it's conveying what you would want. So Judah, as you think about your company name, do you have a tagline or a mark that you?
I do. I've had a tagline for a long time. It's called "Look Good, Make Sense."
Look good, makes sense.
Yeah, as a designer, I feel like, I mean, that's the idea. If it's something if it doesn't look at least a little bit inviting, then you're not going to read it. If it doesn't make sense, and there's no point. So,
right.
And it was, yeah. So I guess I went down the target.
That's okay. Mine
the target line.
reflect, stand out. So I'm in the same boat.
What is yours?
Reflect and stand out. So
Oh,
reflect,
like
stand out.
Yeah.
And it's more because a lot of people build a brand as they might confuse it with bragging. I don't think of branding as bragging. I think of branding as you think about who you are, and that then differentiates you. And so reflect, stand out. And so as you think about whichever tagline you decide to use or the category, again, just think about what help does the name of your company maybe need, right? What additional evidence do you need to convey what you do? So if you have a name, but it's close, maybe it's not perfect, or maybe it is perfect, but it still doesn't tell everybody everything. You've got other things to add in to give it strength and clarity.
You mentioned earlier that you thought 4 words or less is usually the best. Because I can think of several that use more than 4 words, but they're very well known. All the news that's fit the print is, the New York Times, or you're in good hands with Allstate. There are a few more words, I guess, but I think your point is well taken, that the fewer words, probably the better.
Yes, we all have attention issues and the ability to remember things. So yeah.
I was going to say memorable and easy to, kind of, if it's got a rhyme or it's got a flow.
Or alliteration, right? Democracy dies in darkness.
Oh yeah.
I gotta love alliteration. I can't leave alliteration out. So yeah, just these are some things to play with. And Ellen, one of the things I actually usually do all of these exercises, right? I get all of my competitors' names and logos. I'll put them on a slide or on a page and look at them, and including their taglines. I'll look at, I'll do all the word clouds. I'll do the brainstorming names. I'll do this exercise with taglines. I'll do the name table where I do different versions of the name. And when you look at all of that, then you start to have a lot of information and choice that can help you move some of these around and try different versions. And then what you want to do is come up with 3 or 4, try them with folks, ask them what they think. Maybe you can do more. It just depends on who you're asking. But I think having a couple of versions to get feedback and know, well, what do people think what do they think your company does based on what they're reading? All right, so let me just wrap up and then let's open it up to Q&A or brainstorm. I'm happy to do that. So just to recap, in the very beginning, I asked all those hard questions like, what do you want to do with your business in 5 or 10 years? Is it going to a family member? Are you selling? Are you exiting? Do you want people to, hire people and then they step in and run the business while you step out and you just get to make all the money while they do all the work, right? What's your long-term strategy? How does your name support that? Understanding how the name drives the business and the brand identity. So if you're doing a travel business and it's light and fun and airy, that might be very different than financial advocacy. So making sure that the name at least fits a category. I have on occasion seen wealth management brands pick a very different name that's all about the soft skills or something unique to stand out, but it still is a little bit, I don't want to say disconcerting, but it doesn't quite feel right when you go to learn what they do, because you're like, oh, you're having a lot of fun with your name. Like, should I take you seriously? So just something to think about.
Right. Because you have to have a name that evokes confidence.
Right. At the end of the day. And that might be different things to different audiences based on your industry. If I hire a graphic designer, I don't want their name to look like they stenciled it. Like, it should look more complicated than something a 3-year-old could draw. Although stencils could be tricky. We've talked a lot about different ways to brainstorm names. I would do all of them, right? There's no downside per se. Just set a timer because you want to get different perspectives. And again, that's why I actually had several friends come over, because they know me, but they're not constrained by what I was thinking about They just brainstormed out loud with me. We talked about taglines, logos, and names and how those go together. And then making sure we use those in the best way to communicate what we do, but also differentiate and stand out. So let me pause here because this is a lot, but I know you have access to the slides and a worksheet and all that good stuff. What kind of questions do you have before we wrap up?
I'm not sure this is a question. I'm sure there is a question here someplace. But first of all, outstanding presentation, Jen. Really super. And just this idea of disrupting, you know, Marty Neumeier, I'm sure you probably know him better than I do, Jen. He's a brand guy, wrote one of the first books on brand called The Brand Gap. He wrote another book called Zag. And the idea is when everybody zigs, you zag. And so and this idea of being disruptive and about being unique. I mean, and I think that to me is I guess the holy grail in a sense is when do you, like Google, for me, Google is a great example because first they get these 3 primary colors and it's the highest tech company in the world, you know, and they've got this, you know, this silly name. And I think that differentiated them. And even on their, you know, I don't know if they've got a tagline, it's just a page with a box, you know, typing what you want. Completely, like they're even stepping out of it completely, almost making fun of themselves. And I mean, but who comes up with that, right? I mean, you know, how do you know, or Microsoft, which is very, you know, methodical in a way, micro, small software. You know, I mean, it's like, you know, kind of embodies maybe the way they think, and yet, you know, it's the biggest, whatever it is. So I think that. And I think that's kind of the one bottom line for me is it's like, you know, it's like, who knows? Like you can be an expert and then suddenly someone does something, everything against what we say. And it's the biggest thing in the world. You know, it's like planning something that goes viral. How do you can't plan, you know, virality or whatever. But I guess putting yourself in that position. So something like going through all this, you know, we've done all this, and yet I still feel I want to go this way, you know.
And I think some of that probably depends on the brand of the company, right? Like Microsoft, no offense to Bill Gates, is predictable, right? And consistent. Exactly. And you know what you're going to get. Where, you know, then the opposite, right? We got Apple, right? And we all probably remember the Microsoft Apple guys. Runs cool and different and hip. And then Microsoft is the, you know, pencil in the pocket kind of thing. And I think with Google going against Yahoo and others, I think in that case, it had permission to be different. And it actually had to be different because it was already different and as far as who's in the marketplace. So I think that's where you can look at the competitor slide and go, how much permission do we have to be different? Is it an advantage to our company to be that different or disadvantage? And more importantly, is it on brand? So if Ellen wants to be disruptive in her approach and do something totally different than any other advocacy or financial advocacy, different values, different message, different process, different everything, yeah, then you actually do want to think about how disruptive do we need to be, because maybe the name needs to be that disruptive too. So I think a lot of it boils down to what are the promises your company is making and making sure your name and your graphics and your design and your message all support those promises.
Yeah, and if you're good enough, you know, if you're really good, then you know you can call yourself whatever you want. You know, who's going to argue with you? You know.
Yes, there is that. You have to do what you say you can do.
Yeah.
So. Any questions, Diana?
And Jen, can you also put your email address in the chat so folks can reach out to you?
Yeah, I'm gonna put this slide up and I'll put my email in chat. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or email me. Naming is not something you should do on your own. It's something you should definitely do with people. And, you know, definitely with who your audience is, so you know if it's resonating or not. Not just anybody, but with your actual end decision maker. All right, so I'm going to
stop. This is fabulous. Thank you so much. Big round of applause, Jen. We appreciate you very much.
Of course, thanks for the great discussion. Thank you, Michael Appreciate your feedback, and Ellen and Shira. And Judith, thank you very much.
Yeah, we appreciated it, and hope to have you back again if you're willing to join us.
Yes.
Thank you. This was very helpful.
Thank you very much. It's been
Absolutely.
excellent. Thank you.
Absolutely. And so before we sign off, just reminding you of BoomerWorks.org. That's where you'll find our training center tab, which is videos just like this, since we've been doing this since April 2020. So feel free to avail yourself of that. And our meetup tab has the future meetups that we're going to be having, and we're booked out all the way through the end of the year. So feel free to join us, and we'll look forward to seeing you all again. And thanks again, Jen. Appreciate everybody. Have a blessed day.
Bye. Goodbye.